A special welcome to you, Battler. I'm sure I know who you are. Welcome to Gander Packers. Good to have you guys on board. Hi, Kerry, Mayberry. Great to see you. Kylie, always good to have you here. Lil, Linda, Valerie, one of our regulars. It's great to see you all on board. Okay. We're going to kick right off at 12 today, so I'm hoping we won't have too many latecomers, but nevertheless, we always record, so these are always available to you after the event. So welcome to Fair Farms webinar number 10 for the year. This is the second last webinar of the year. We'll finish up in November with the last one before we start redesigning for next year. So welcome to everybody who is with us and to all of you who may be coming a bit later on. Today we're going to be talking about heat stress and sun safety, and obviously no better time to be talking about it than at the beginning of summer. Before it gets too bad, although I understand some have been suffering already. So we want to go into your obligations as an employer under the work health and safety legislation and talk about the kind of practices and policies that you need to get in place to deal with situations when the heat is on. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, we're going to look at some of the hazards. They seem pretty obvious, but we're going to go over them anyway. Obviously, as we always do with work health and safety webinars, we always talk about the legislative obligations and your duties as an officer. Let's identify the hazards clearly and the risks, and then also look at what control measures we can put in place. And then we'll just talk about some of those illnesses and treatments. And obviously what we always ask people to do is to be proactive. Okay, so the heat is on. You will have all heard by now that we're heading into another hot summer. So the onset of those two major climate events, the El Nino being one of them, means that the remaining months of 2023 are likely to be hot and dry, and particularly on for anybody on the eastern side. Combined with the background warming of climate change, climate scientists have warned us that Australia could be in for a summer of severe heat. And just to illustrate, you may probably have seen this information before, straight off the Bureau of Meteorology website, where this actually tells us the chance of exceeding the median maximum temperatures for November to January. And what you can see there is pretty much a 60 to 80%, but pretty much an 80% chance that all of Australia will experience higher than median or normal temperatures, maximum temperatures. And similarly, with median minimum temperatures, try saying that with a mouthful of marbles, the chance of exceeding the median minimum temperatures are again very high, and they're up in that kind of 70 to 80 percentile, except perhaps in some of those regions where you might expect that not to be so. But nonetheless, again, we're in for higher than normal low temperatures. So the nights are going to be hot. And also add this is the tripartite. The chance of exceeding the median rainfall for November to January is extremely low. So the expectation is high maximums, high minimums, and less than normal rainfall. So we do know what that means in terms of, working in the heat and particularly working in our industry. Oops, I beg your pardon. So working in the heat, the hazards, well, they're obvious, but obviously heat can be incredibly hazardous to health, to outside workers and people who have to work in high heat environment, and can cause some fairly significant issues, problems and illnesses, and even death. The human body has to maintain a temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. And once it starts getting higher than 38, 39, you are in a serious state. If the body has to work too hard to keep cool, or it starts to overheat, then a worker can suffer from a heat-related illness. And as I've said earlier, that can be fatal. This is a general term to describe a range of progressive heat-related conditions, which we'll run through today, and including, just kind of heat exhaustion or hot dehydration, heat rash, cramps, stress and stroke. And the obvious one for us, again, is sunburn. As always, you have duties as an employer and as a director and sometimes as a manager that you must exercise due diligence to ensure that the business or undertaking complies with the Act and the regulations, and today in particular regard to heat. This includes taking reasonable steps to ensure that the business has and uses appropriate resources and processes to eliminate or minimise the risks to health and safety around the dangers associated with working in hot environments, working outside in the sun, etc. And we'll look at some of those in a bit more detail. When we look at your legislative obligations, again, these are standard across all elements of the work health and safety implementation. So you have to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, that workers and other people are not exposed to the health and safety risks arising from the business or undertaking. So your obligation is clear in regards to providing a high level of protection. It requires you to manage your health and safety risks by eliminating them if you can, and if this is not reasonably practicable, by minimising those risks so far as is reasonably practicable. And we'll look at some of those solutions. In relation to heat, what this means is, so far as we can, we have sufficient ventilation to enable workers to carry out their work without risk to their own health and safety. And that workers carrying out work in those heat extremes, or cold even, are able to carry out the work without risk to health and safety. So similar kind of principles, same, but different. And this, oh, I've done it again. Sorry, I keep doing it. And this applies just because someone is working under shade or, under cover, I beg your pardon, so like a packing shed or whatever. It doesn't mean that they're not exposed to heat stress. Working outdoors in extremely hot weather and or humid conditions is obviously dangerous, but so can working near machinery or, packing lines or processing machinery that radiate large amounts of heat. Think about even in the machinery shed or in the packing shed or whatever. Working in contact with or near hot objects, so whatever that might mean. And also, obviously, completing physically strenuous tasks, and again, especially so in warm environments when we think about the ideal body temperature up 37 degrees. And whether or not the actual things that you might provide for protection, whether or not the use of clothing or personal protective equipment actually add to the risk. You may, in fact, if you're requiring people to don a certain amount of equipment, like in welding or whatever, that you then have to think about what risk does the wearing of that safety protective equipment then provide. So you could have a kind of a chain of things that you need to be looking at. And to give you a bit of an idea, I found this really useful heat index. So up the top line there, it just talks about the air temperature all along the top. So it goes from 21 across up to 49, God forbid. And down on the left-hand side, that column then talks about relative humidity. And when you kind of work across that matrix, you can see that, if it's about, even if it's only, 29 or so outside, if you've even got 60% humidity, then the temperature that the body is actually feeling is closer to 32 degrees, not 29. And so it goes. So the relative humidity is a considerable contributing factor to things like heat stress, heat exhaustion, and all the heat-related illnesses. So I thought that was just a really useful matrix to provide to you, and also because it shows you the kind of serious risk. So if it's 35 degrees and it's 80% humidity, then you're in the red area there. So you then have to take action to try and prevent the consequences of working in those kind of temperatures. So some of the common effects of heat stress, and you'll probably be familiar with some of these, include heat rash, so leading to skin irritation and just general discomfort. Heat cramps, that might be around heavy sweating or without replacing salt, electrolytes, fluids. People will often faint in high heat. You see it happens you see it happen in parades in particular. But if you're doing, lots of physical activity, physical labour along with it, then that will also have an impact on fainting. Dehydration, again, from increased sweating and if they're not drinking enough water. Heat stroke occurs when the body can just no longer cool itself, and this is your red danger area. Heat stroke can be fatal and has been on several farms throughout Australia in the last decade or so. Obviously, burns that can cut you if you're coming into contact with hot surfaces and machinery and the like, or tools. Slips is an interesting one. If workers are sweating and they're using sharp implements, tools, knives, power tools, whatever, that will be another thing that you might have to consider. There's also obviously things around the worker, around reduced concentration, so that, constant kind of exhaustion that comes with just being drained by high heat and humidity, and that can lead to confusion and mistakes. And, in a high-risk industry like horticulture, again, we need to be particularly vigilant. Increased chemical uptake in the body also, I didn't know this, so this is my learning curve today, may occur as the heat causes the body to absorb chemicals differently. So it can in fact have different impacts on different kinds of medication. So if people have indicated to you, if they are on, life-saving or, even any kind of medication that may be impacted by heat, or even if they don't know, it's useful to have that in their health declaration when they do their induction. And that way you've got a bit of a heads up that if anything is likely to happen, then you can name it. And if things get serious, it's important to be able to name it. Okay, so let's look at some best practice approaches and see what we can do. So obviously, like everything, we take the risk management approach. So we identify the hazards. So that is, find out if heat is a problem in your workplace. So let's look at the following kind of things. The air temperature at different times of the day. Obviously, it's going to be cooler early in the morning, later in the afternoon. So you might think about your work schedules. Whether people are working inside or outside and what that actually means. I mean, you could in fact have situations where it is more the risk of heat is more elevated inside than it is outside. That might have to do with airflow, what kind of breezes you might get. If you're working in valleys, is it hotter down low than it is up high, etc. Radiant heat sources, again, out of machinery. Again, we've got to always think about the physically demanding requirements of these kinds of outdoor jobs. And also the workers, again, not only the kind of medication thing that we talked about earlier, but their own capability, their own physical fitness, and whether or not they have medical issues that could be impacted by heat. So you'd want to be, obviously if people have got some even minor heart issues, you might want to be particularly vigilant around those type of people. If somebody is particularly overweight or struggles with, climbing or walking or reaching or whatever, again, you've got to be sensitive about these kinds of things, but it's worth having those conversations to ensure that as far as possible, you are identifying the hazards and then assessing the risks. So what conditions contribute to heat-related illness at your workplace? If you are in a geographical area that contributes heat waves, and most of us will be this summer, it seems, it can make it harder to sleep. So fatigue could be an issue. High humidity makes it harder for the body to cool. So again, we're talking about movement and breeze. Which times of the day are hotter? So can we manage our physical workloads? And the Spaniards and Italians have got it right, siesta. The harder the body is working, the more heat it needs to lose, and the more that the fluids need to be replaced. This is all common sense activity, but it's useful just to think about it in more detail. Fit and acclimatised workers may cope better. So bearing in mind, if we've got people particularly coming from the Northern Hemisphere winters, or people who are just simply not used to Australian summers, then we need to be considering how they cope with the type of heat that Australia offers. Again, is clothing, including PPE, adding to the problem? Again, medical conditions, and is there cool drinking water and electrolytes on hand? So assess the types of risks that are in place, that are posed by those hazards you've identified, and then we need to address the risks. And as always, we use our hierarchy of risk control. Now, again, the solutions to this seem to just pop into your head and seem to be fairly, obvious, but it's useful to go through the exercise of this. If you get used to using this, you really begin to internalise, and it helps you to think really quickly if you see something. You work through this process. So elimination, can I get rid of it? Well, not really, because, it's the sun and it is our weather, and so we cannot eliminate it. Can we substitute it? Well, no, we can't. Can we isolate workers from the heat? Yeah, we can, but is it reasonably practicable for us to put up shade across every piece of our growing area? So, and obviously, it will not be practicable in a lot of cases. But that may well be something that you think about if you provide, for example, gazebos out in the field for people to gather under for shade if there's no trees and the things like that. Again, engineering controls, in terms of perhaps in your packing shed, do you install air conditioner? Do you install fans? What kind of cooling mechanisms or engineering can you install to assist the problem? Administrative controls, they generally involve things like policies. So they're the thou shalt nots, and the thou shalts. That is, you will always come to work with a hat and with appropriate clothing, and that will generally include a long sleeve shirt. You may, want to wear sunglasses. We would recommend it. Always have sunscreen, but I would also recommend that you provide gallons of sunscreen for people, especially in the field. And then the next step is the PPE. So, that's where we're talking about hats, sunglasses, sunscreen, and whether or not, you're going to provide neck air conditioners or, whatever kind of tool or policy or environment you can do to address the heat. So once we work through this, it becomes, fairly obvious the types of things that we can and cannot introduce. But if an inspector were to come on board, or an auditor, for example, to ask you how you manage this process, how do you manage heat on your farm, then being able to demonstrate that you have used this process to identify the hazards, to assess the risks, and then to address or mitigate those risks will hold you in fairly good stead. So it's fairly important that you work your way through the process. Some of the things you have to consider, and again, this is like a risk assessment matrix. So what is the likely impact of the hazard? How likely is it for an injury to occur? So if I stay out in the sun picking capsicums for 2 hours, what is the likely impact on me? So you need to think about what the likely impact is and how likely is it to cause harm. And then how severe it is. If it's, again, using your heat matrix, you might be able to, or your heat index, you might be able to say, well, we actually think we can probably stay outside. If it's 30 degrees, we can stay outside for, 2 hours, and then we need to take 20 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever for shade, for drink, for rest, and to make sure that everybody's okay. So you need to work out what best suits your environment and your farm. Whether or not your existing control measures are effective, just kind of saying, oh, we need you to, we want you to wear a hat, and people turning up without them, you might want to make this you will wear a hat, you will bring one, or we'll make you wear one of our, one of ours, make them ugly. Any further action you can take to control the risk, and how urgently you need to take that action. And you need to be thinking about those kinds of issues now before we truly hit the peak of summer. Again, consulting with your workers is always important. If you have health and safety representatives, include them in that conversation. If you don't, then make sure that you talk with your workers, whether you do that through a toolbox meeting, have some dedicated conversations about it, so that you're actually able to tell them what you need them to do to protect themselves from the heat, and the potential dangers, but also protect your business. So this is your business, and you can't have your workers running around out there posing risks to your business. So you can be fairly firm about your requirements around this stuff. And if you've got labour hire workers, also bring that labour hire provider in and have a conversation with that provider about what your rules are, and include obviously those workers in any conversation, discussion and instruction that you have around these issues, and work closely with each of the elements because they will have different requirements. So the requirements in the packing shed and the machinery shed might be quite different from the packing from the field workers. So individual conversations with those different groups of workers will give you better results, better outcomes. Okay, let's have a look at some of these illnesses and how we might treat them in a bit of detail. So dehydration, what is it? Well, if you've got mild to moderate, these are the kinds of things you're looking for. That someone is thirsty, dry mouth, lips, tongue. They could be dizzy, they could be lightheaded, especially if they stand up. They might have the beginnings or the middle of a headache, and they could have dark wee. And I've got actually the link to the wee chart. I notice that whenever I'm on farm, I nearly always see it in the bathrooms, but I put the link there up there just in case. What this does is help people understand when they're dehydrated. But if we're talking severe dehydration, then obviously extreme thirst, very dry mouth. They might be panting and breathing if you've ever seen a cat or a dog do it. They could have a very fast heart rate or low blood pressure. They could have a fever. They could have no fluids coming out of them at all, and they could be irritable, drowsy or confused. This is a point for some fairly serious and emergent action. So any kind of symptoms of dehydration, move the person to a cool place, loosen the tight clothing, remove anything that you can without, embarrassing the individual, and get them to drink small amounts of cool water. It's best to sip cool water. Don't let them glug, or the next thing they'll do is throw it up. If the symptoms don't improve after a relatively short period of time, then ring 000 and get some medical advice, okay? So dehydration. Let's have a look at heat exhaustion, which happens when someone becomes so dehydrated due to fluid loss and or physical activity, which is the potential in our industry, obviously, is both. So again, a normal or even a mildly higher body temperature, remembering that 37 is ideal. They might have cool, pale and clammy skin. When you get the cold sweats on a hot night, if there's a breeze, there could be excessive sweating, but it could be, the skin could still be cool and clammy. They might be ragingly thirsty. They could have a headache, muscle cramps might kick in, a rapid or a weak pulse, and again, fainting or dizziness. And I think probably, sorry, again, we lie the person down if we can in a cool area, remove loosened clothing. If you can, get the hands and the feet into cold water and moisten the skin, and keep a cool towel and a damp towel. If the person is fully alert, give them small drinks of water. And if there are cramps, then, you can kind of do some massage. If they're not improving, again, we always just refer them to the hospital, ring the ambulance and get them treated. We move now into the more serious kind of things, which is heat stroke. And heat stroke is life-threatening. It is a life-threatening emergency, and it can cause a person to collapse or fall unconscious and drop into a coma. So you need to be really kind of monitoring people. And this is, as I said earlier, this has already occurred once or twice on farms in the last couple of years. So they're similar. We're looking again at a high body temperature. So if you're feeling someone and they're burning up, but they're not sweating. So the skin, in fact, might be dry. It might be really red, and it might be really hot. They could be experiencing nausea. They could be having muscle spasms where they're twitching. There could be pain that they're experiencing all throughout the body. There might be confusion or odd behaviour, and there is the potential for a seizure or a loss of consciousness. If we have got any of these symptoms, then the best thing you can do is ring 000. You've got to know those signs. And again, there's a number of posters. So it's really important that your workers are able to identify these signs in their colleagues. One supervisor in 20 or 30 people can't necessarily keep an eye on everybody. So this is a point where we're asking to keep for our workers to keep an eye on each other. And don't call 911, call 000. 000. The treatment, though, is if you can, you immerse the person in a bath or shower them, so with cool water. You cool the person with household items, wet towels, fans, ice packs in the neck, the groin and the armpits, where all those central joining uppy bloody places are. If they're unresponsive, place them in recovery. If you can do CPR, get your first aid person there, and obviously then make sure that the ambulance is well and truly on its way. Sirens blaring. We don't want people to die. Okay, let's have a look at sun safety. Again, being a person of very fair skin, I'm never outside unless I'm completely slathered in SPF 50, 60, and if I could get it, 400 sunscreen. Solar ultraviolet, so UV rays, obviously can cause damage to living organisms. We know that through skin cancers and the like. Carcinogenic, cannot be seen or felt. You often can't feel yourself burning. I do, but some people can't. It doesn't depend on the temperature, nor does it depend, obviously, we all learnt this as an Australian child, nor does it depend on how many clouds there are in the sky. It can be high even on cool and cloudy days. It can pass through loosely woven materials, so anybody who's into white linen, be mindful. It can bounce off reflective surfaces like metal, concrete, water, snow, glass, obviously. But it's also the best natural source of vitamin D, which in small amounts is really essential for good health. When we're looking at our UV index, and these are usually put up all over regional areas, usually coming into new areas or small towns, whether you've got a low, moderate, high or very high fire warning system is worked on this. So if you hear on the radio that there's a moderate to high to very high or extreme UV index, this is when we start applying all of our protective gear, all of our sunscreen, etc. So for anybody who's been affected by sunburn, and I'm looking at all those British tourists out here trying to wear bikini tops, one, don't allow them, but two, in the case of sunburn, sorry. Again, we're talking cool showers, lukewarm showers. You could have heat stress and heat stroke associated with bad sunburn. Get them to use paracetamol or ibuprofen to reduce the pain, drink plenty of water, leave any blisters alone, get some ointment or cream. You're not supposed to cover them because they are meant to dry out, although sometimes I find a dry covering just helps to keep your hands away from them. Give your skin the time it needs to repair. So again, let's talk about these treatments with our workers and make sure that they understand how to deal with the Australian sun and what to do in the event that they find themselves red as a lobster. Okay, so control measures when we're minimising the risk of both heat illness and exposure. Can we provide shade for outdoor work? Are there trees nearby? Have you got some in the middle of the field? Can you put up some gazebos, temporary or otherwise, just to provide a little bit of a break for people if they need to rest in shade? Making sure that there's extra breaks if you need them. So, if you would normally have two breaks a day, maybe you need to increase the number of breaks just to make sure that people are not, working themselves beyond their capabilities. Making sure that they've got loose fitting, lightweight clothing for air movement. I know that those sun rashies, a lot of people wear those, so they're apparently very good. I don't know how cool they are, but something really cool and flowy without it being too open weave. Have a think about whether or not you can change your work schedules around. Again, whether or not we schedule heavy work if we can in the cooler times of the day, or can we move people inside or under shade in the warmer parts of the day? I know that a lot of you already do this. You know, I'm not telling you how to, what is it, suck eggs. I know that many of you already do this, but for those of you who are looking for ideas, you can also do things about rotating workers. You know, if there's some sections working in shade and some in the hot, then you might move them around. Be creative, have a think about what you can do and work with your workers, because again, they will often have good ideas about how to address. But we obviously have this old thing that's been around since the 70s. It's grown a little bit. It used to be slip, slop, slap, but now it's slip, slop, slap, slide and shade. So that's sunscreen, hat, sunglasses, protective clothing, and seeking shade wherever possible. And that is actually a link in that slide, managing the risks of solar ultraviolet radiation from Safe Work Australia. So if you wanted to learn more about that, you can click on that when you get these slides through. Okay, there's some resources also that are pretty useful. The BOM Bureau of Meteorology issues the Sun Smart UV alerts, which is based on the index, when the index is forecast to reach 3 or above. So the minute we're going to be hitting an index of 3, even that is, you know, hot enough to cause some concerns. So this can all be downloaded. The Cancer Council has a smartphone application, so you can download the SunSmart app, and that gives you all sorts of really useful information. The website obviously can give us some long-term forecasts, and that's where, you know, obviously I get all my information from. And there's also one called ARPANSA, which is the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, and it's got some ultraviolet radiation index information on it as well, a bit more detail. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, those are just some additional resources. Again, I did say that I would provide you a link to the urine colour chart. So if you haven't already got that in your bathrooms, in your toilets, print that off and pop that up there. That gives workers a fairly good indication of how they're going, hydration-wise. And if you want to get some slip, slop, slap, slide, seek posters, and the seek means seek shade, then you can also download those from here. Okie dokie. Oh, I'm doing well. Just 1 minute over. Okay, so key takeaways from today. Know your obligations around heat stress and sun safety, and do the work to understand the potential risks on your property and at your workplace. Remind your employees of their obligations for their own health and safety and their obligations to their workmates. So, you know, reminding people to keep an eye out for each other in the field, on the job, and understanding when they might need to act or respond. Make heat and sun safety a key part of your induction process. And again, if you've got new workers and it hasn't been a feature, like you've been inducting during winter, then do yourself a favour and do a 15 or 20-minute toolbox meeting just to remind people of the dangers and what they need to do to protect themselves and how you will respond. The first aid officer might want to just refresh their memory in terms of what they need to have in their kit and what they might need to be looking out for. Provide plenty of sunscreen, provide plenty of water, potable water and shade where possible, where you can. Look, keep spare hats around and make sure people wear them. I know people are a bit thingy about hats. I get that. You can always just, kind of disinfect them with a bit of Glen 20 or something. But if they haven't got them, it's just so dangerous to go out in the Australian sun without a hat these days. I think you would find yourself, questioned if there was to be an incident on your property. Review your PPE to ensure it's not causing extra heat stress or anything like that. And so thank you for joining us again today. Always great to have you on board. And just a reminder, our November webinar is our last webinar of 2023. It's on Wednesday the 29th at 12 noon, and we'd really like you to join us for a discussion around diversity and inclusion. So we're looking at it in the context of some of these kind of social compliance obligations that people have, and just trying to demystify what some of that means in concepts of diversity, how that applies at our workplaces, and how we might operate around some practices and processes around inclusivity. And that little picture there just gives you an indication of how diverse the Australian population is is and is becoming. So thank you, everybody. Again, my gratitude for joining us, and I look forward to you in November. The slides will be delivered to you, and I hope you have a fantastic week, and we'll see you in a month. Bye.